Welcome back to another episode. So in this episode we're going to be fitting skylights on this van. So we're going to run through one of them with you and show you what you need and how to do it. So you can see from the bench we've got quite a few bits that we're going to need to install this Max fan. The power tools we need are going to be a jigsaw with a metal cutting blade. Now that's a fine tooth blade, so that'll cut through the metal nicely. We're going to need our impact driver, a drill with a 3mm drill bit. This is to pilot our holes. Obviously the Max fan, an adapter plate. I'll go through this with you guys in a second. We're going to need some more primer with a primer applicator, file, a deburrer, marker, measuring tape, some masking tape, and some Sikaflex 522 with a silicone gun. The first thing we're going to do before we even look to fit in this is inside the vehicle we're just going to put something to catch the swarf that's going to come off this cut. So because we're cutting metal, there's going to be a lot of fine metal bits that are going to be on the outside and the inside. Right, so we're just using a bit of fabric with some magnets, making sure it's clear of where any cutting blades are going to come through. Well, the first thing we're going to do before starting is give this roof a good clean. Right, now that the roof is cleaned, what we're now going to do is we're actually going to use the roof adapter as our template to mark the cutout for the skylight. Now, just to go into a bit more detail with this adapter plate, you can see on the van it has ribs going across the roof. What the adapter plate will do is follow the ribs underneath like so, but on top it's given us a nice flat surface to fit the skylight onto. On this Peugeot Boxer, where the cutout is, all falls within a flat section, so we don't actually need to use an adapter plate on the front. But when we come to doing the rear one later on, that's where we're going to need this. For now, we're going to put it upside down and use the flat area, and what we now need to do is square this off and make sure that we're bang center. Now we can use the ends of the ribs, both sides, to make sure that we're nice and square, and then also center. So we're going to do that. We're going to mark it. We can take this away and then we can start cutting some holes. Now I've got it center, I can just run my marker along the inside of this adapter plate, remove the adapter plate, and we have been left now with the markings for where we need to cut. If obviously on your vehicle you don't need an adapter plate for whatever reason, then you're going to need to measure this. Now it's a 400 by 400 opening, so what we tend to do is add a couple of mil onto each one. So we'll do 402 by 402, so it gives us just a little bit of play, because some of the skylights are exactly 400 by 400, so it just makes them a bit tight getting in. To protect the paintwork and the surrounding area, obviously we don't want the base plate of the jigsaw scratching it, especially when you're cutting the metal. As I mentioned earlier, you get little metal filings, which if they get caught under the jigsaw is just going to scratch that. We're going to run plenty of masking tape now all around the outside of this marking. We've now got our area protected with some masking tape, so we're now ready to start the cut. Now the first thing we're actually going to be doing is putting a hole in the opposing corners that will allow us to put the jigsaw blade in. For this, we're going to be using a stepper drill bit. I'll put it on the Amazon shop, so if you do need one, you'll be able to find one on there. Once we've got the two holes done, you can see already this swarf, so we're going to get rid of this swarf first. Now when you're cutting on these ribbed roofs, there is something you do have to be careful of. So you've got this base plate of the jigsaw that's nice and flat, but as you're going over some of the ridges, what it can do is it can kick the jigsaw back, and there's nothing you can really do about that. But what you have got to be careful of is that the end of the blade doesn't come out of your cut, because it's going to bounce on the top of your roof. So just try and keep that flat or nose down as much as you can. We've cut our hole. Before we do anything else, what I would like to do is just double check that the base plate for either the Max fan or the Skylight which you're using will fit inside this hole. Now I know that does fit. I'm going to put this back to one side a minute. We're going to remove the green tape, and now we're going to treat these edges. So we're going to use the deburrer to take the worst of it off, and then we'll use our file just to make sure this is all perfectly smooth and that we've got no sharp edges on it. Right, so I've got the deburrer tool. We want to go around it along the top edge and the bottom edge. So we're just going to gently go over it making sure we're getting rid of any of that burr from our cut. So I've used the deburrer to take the worst off. Now we're just going to do the fine sort of cleaning with a file. Once I've gone around it, I'm just going to run my fingers gently around it just to make sure that that is all properly clean. Now, obviously it's not super sharp, but it's not going to be dull, so just be careful when you're just checking that. And I can feel from that we've got a lovely clean edge, so we can now move on to the next stage. I'm now going to use some isopropanol alcohol and just a microfiber cloth, and I'm just going to clean all around that cut edge just to make sure that we've got rid of all the micro shavings from that cut. And once we've done that, we're then going to be able to prime it and protect it. Okay, so that's nice and clean. We're now going to put the base plate back in so we can see the outer edge of where that's going to be, and we're just going to mark that off with some masking tape. And I can now see the area that's going to fall underneath the adapter plate. So we're actually going to be using this primer not only to seal the bare edges on this metal, but we're also going to come up towards this masking tape a little bit and prime that surface ready to receive the silicone that's going to obviously hold on that. But before we do the primer, there is one more step we need to do. Right, so I've got some 150 grit paper here, but what I've done is I've just added another layer of masking tape, and I've come in about sort of 8mm from where I know the edge of that base plate's going to be. Now with the sandpaper, what you need to do is all that bare metal there, we just need to score it. The reason I've done that is because when you put a silicone onto a surface, if I put it onto just fresh, flat, smooth paint, I've got more risk of that silicone coming off. So by just sanding that and by scoring that area, it just means I'm creating a bit of a better surface for that silicone to attach to. Once I've done that, I've then just re-cleaned it again with some of the isopropanol alcohol. Now, we can get that primed and we'll let that dry, and whilst that's drying we can jump on to the next step. We've got our internal frame. This is just your simple 2x1 batten. We have an internal space of 402 by 402, again just allowing a couple of mil to make sure the frame comes inside. We need to line this up with the inner frame, and then we're going to hold that in situ. What we do know right now is that because there's ribs still in this area, I'm actually a little bit proud. So when I put this up, I'm probably about 8mm off, and that's because of this rib here and these ribs here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take a little bit off the edges of this frame either side so that when it goes in, it's nice and flush. Right, we've trimmed that down, so when I now put that up on the hole, it's lovely and flush to the metal above the top skin. So what I'm going to do is just jack this in place. You can use silicones to hold that up there. Bearing in mind, this isn't structural. This is actually there to act as like a sandwich. So when we put the screws down through the flange of the max fan, we don't want to just go through the metal. That is also going to go through the wood and create that sandwich effect where it's going to pull it nice and tight. Now that's in situ, our primer is dried. We can now pilot hole the base plate, and then we can get that stuck down. If you are fitting a max fan, it's important. The two metal caps here are to receive the screws off the max fan. They need to go sideways across the van, and we'll get this located into situ like that. You can also see on this base plate some little dimples, and this is where we're gonna need to pilot ready for fixing. So what I'm doing in a minute is just running a pencil line around the outside so that I can see exactly where the outer side of that flange is going to sit. And the reason for that now is we are now ready to silicone it down and then put our screws through. Now we're going to do 2 beads of silicone. We're going to do a bead on the very inner edge and then another bead on the edge that pretty much follows the screw holes, and we're going to make them quite thick beads. We would prefer the silicone to be squeezing out so we know we've got adequate amount of silicone in there to hold that down and also stop any water leaks. Okay, so I've got my 2 lines of silicone now, as I explained. I've got one on the inner edge, one on the outer edge. This hasn't got to be too pretty. It's more important you get a good bulk of silicone up there. You can clean any overspill later on. What I would prefer is to make sure I've got plenty of contact between the van and the flange. This is going to stop any leaking and give us a nice strong fix to it. Right, so we've got the bead of silicone down. We've also primed the underneath of the flange, and now we're going to mount it. Right, so I've got silicone coming up through all the screw holes, which is what we want. And then we're going to use the stainless steel dome capped screws then that come with the kit, and we can just fix this in. We've now got all our stainless steel screws are in, so we tend to do all the 4 corners, then do all the center ones, and then we just go around making sure they're all nice and tight. You can see we've got plenty of silicone that's come out. So now we're actually going to give this a full clean down, get rid of all that excess silicone, give it a nice good clean. Then we'll give it an alcohol clean, and then we will do another bead of silicone just around the outside. Then we've got 3 layers of silicone on that one, and we will also do some domes over the screws just to make sure they're sealed in as well. We won't put the max fan mounted on top today because that goes on a rubber seal with 4 screws, so this is the bulk of what needs to be done to fit a Skylight. So we'll get those last bits done and we'll show you how that looks. And then this is what it looks like completed. So we've just gone around the outside with a bead of silicone, and we've also domed the screws. Obviously everything we do, we want it to be pretty, but sometimes something needs to be practical before it's pretty. So whilst we'd prefer not to have to silicone the screws on the top, it's best practice to make sure that you get no water that's going to run down that screw and inside. They are stainless screws, so they're not going to rust, but there's always that risk of it just tracking down the thread of the screw and going in. So now they're sealed, we know that cannot happen, but also when you put the max fan on, those screws are pretty much covered up anyway. That is one Skylight done. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you just put the max fan onto these rubber grommets, and then you have 2 screws either side that fasten it down. That is it. Now, we got a rear one to do, but you've already seen one, so we're not going to show you the other one. But what I will tell you is if you're using an adapter plate like we will do on the back, then all you need to do is you repeat the process of how we fitted this flange, but you kind of do it twice. But what we do with the adapter plate is we will score and prime both the top and the bottom to make sure we're getting the best adhesion possible. Now, your internal flange, this fits inside and will go up into your Skylight. We don't fit this till your roof is on, so this will go on the outside of whatever covering you have on your roof, and this just screws on, and then this upwards flange section fits nicely into the Skylight.